of the jungle to staying alive for 3 days underwater, check out these insane real-life survival stories. Number 10. Lost in the Sahara Desert. Wandering off in the desert is the last thing you'll want to do, which is something Mauro Prosperi understood before joining the 6-day Marathon of the Sands in Morocco in 1994. Before that, Prosperi was an experienced athlete and long-distance runner, so the marathon here was yet just another challenge to overcome, except that never happened. Several miles into the race, a sandstorm hit, messing up the track, with the seasoned marathoner becoming disoriented. He wandered off in the vast sand fields, somehow finding himself in an abandoned Muslim shrine in Algeria. Naturally, surviving was high up on his priority list, but given his situation, the odds weren't exactly in his favor, so he decided to make do with what he had, or rather what was within reach. For food, he killed bats and met his fluid needs from dew on rocks, wet wipes, and, get this, his own urine. Amid this survival struggle, the thoughts of never being found crept into his head. What was the point of staying alive when he was eventually going to die in the desert? His attempts to die by slitting his wrists were futile, so he kept moving for a few more days until he found a small village from where he was flown to a hospital. Number 9. 3 days underwater. Harrison O'Keen had a cooking gig on the Jackson 4, a tugboat operating off the Nigerian coast. One rough morning in May 2013 saw O'Keen lose his livelihood alongside 11 other crew members when their vessel headed straight to the bottom of the ocean after getting pummeled by heavy swells. O'Keen was in the toilet at the time and couldn't manage to reach the emergency exit fast enough, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Soon enough, the cabin started filling up with water, but stopped just below O'Keen's shoulders. That tiny air bubble would later support the scared 29-year-old for the next 60 hours before the rescue team finally reached him. Given the amount of time he had spent below the surface, it would have been a bad idea to just take him out of the water right away because of the nitrogen that had accumulated in his body. The divers got him diving equipment and into a diving bell before whisking him onto the surface, where he spent the next 2 days in a decompression chamber. Number 8. Longest fall from an airplane. In 1972, flight attendant Vesna Vulovic unintentionally set the record of the longest fall from a plane after a bomb blast. At 33,000 feet, the fall left the then 22-year-old with major injuries, including broken legs and a fractured skull. No one expected her to get out of the incident alive, yet she did somehow. After several months of treatment, she was back to her old self again like nothing happened, although a limp was quite evident in her walk. She also lost memory of the incident for the rest of the years that she was alive. She was willing to go back to her job, but the Yugoslavian national carrier was wary of letting her on board given her newfound celebrity status, so they assigned her different responsibilities away from the Isles. Number 7. 5 days under an 800-pound boulder. Sometimes remote solo adventures aren't always the best of ideas. In 2003, Aaron Ralston was out alone in Blue John Canyon in southeastern Utah on a hike when things suddenly turned awry. As he kept going deeper into a narrow canyon, a boulder fell his way, but he was lucky to not get crushed. Unlucky for him, though, the 800-pound menace pinned down his right arm, ultimately trapping him in the canyon. And being in such a remote area without anyone's knowledge meant he was basically living on borrowed time. Good for him, though. He had some supplies that had sustained him for the first 5 days of the ordeal, hoping against all odds that someone would find him. When his wishes weren't so forthcoming, Ralston knew he had to do something. Marshalling up enough courage, he snapped his forearm using the boulder for leverage before sawing off the remaining bone and skin using a rubber hose from his hydration pack to reduce bleeding. According to Ralston, the whole process took him at least 30 minutes, after which he took a 7-mile walk back to his previous trail. Along the way, he encountered a family who called in authorities, effectively saving his life. Number 6. 438 days at sea. Salvadorian Jose Alvarenga holds the title of the first person to survive at sea for more than a year on a small boat in recorded history. He didn't set out to achieve it, though. On November 17, 2012, he and his partner, Ezequiel Cordoba, rowed into the Pacific on a professional fishing trip. Jose had been doing this for most of his adult life, and he had no doubts that their mini voyage, which was intended to last an approximate 30 hours, was going to be successful. Too bad for them, though, their smooth sailing boat dived right into bad weather just hours after starting their journey. The storm lasted for a good 5 days and pushed the duo off course, so they had to call for help. However, the storm had messed with their communication channels, leaving Alvarenga and his partner on their own. A search party couldn't help either, as it was disbanded after 2 days. Jose and Cordoba continued drifting, surviving on raw fish, turtles, and rainwater. After a few months, the raw food really got to Cordoba, and he would later die, leaving Jose to brave the forced voyage alone. He drifted for another 9 months before coming across the Marshall Islands, from where he was finally rescued. Number 5. 7 lightning strikes. According to National Geographic, lightning is so hot that a single flash can heat up the surrounding air to as much as 5 times the temperature of the surface of the sun. The heat aside, there's also a great deal of electricity released when lightning strikes, enough to keep a 100-watt bulb on for 3 months. For most of us, we can only imagine what that feels like. For US-born Roy Sullivan, though, he didn't have to imagine it. He experienced it not once, but 7 times for the entire time he was alive, landing him in the Guinness Book of World Records for most lightning strikes survived. His first unfortunate stint was in 1942, where he lost a big toenail, and the second was in 1969, taking with it his eyebrows. The third strike came in July 1970, with severe burns on the left shoulder, while the next strike in 1972 set his hair on fire. Roy's fifth lightning encounter in 1973 left him with burned hair again, and severely burned legs, which was followed by an ankle injury after another strike on June 5th, 1976. The final strike was just a year later, in which the unfortunate Roy sustained chest and stomach burns. Number 4. The Apollo 13 mission. Apollo 13 was supposed to be another moon landing and one of the most celebrated events in space exploration. The mission is still celebrated, alright, but for a whole different reason. Different corners of the world watched as the 3 astronauts, Jack Swigert, Jim Lovell, and Fred Hayes, fought against all odds to make a return to Earth after their vehicle had a major mishap. As investigations would later reveal, a bad wiring job ignited the oxygen tank, blowing off part of the spacecraft. The incident meant the team had 2 problems to deal with: a faulty spaceship and very little supplies for oxygen, food, water, and electricity. But when you're staring death in the face, it's all about making do with what you have to survive just long enough until you're in the clear. Most of the little in this case was in the lunar module, a vessel that was supposed to move them back and forth between the command module and the moon's surface. So the trio moved into the lunar module, taking several measures in coordination with Earth Mission Control to finally re-enter the Earth's atmosphere on April 17, 1970, almost a week after launch. Number 3. A black mamba attack. A single black mamba bite packs enough venom to kill an adult human in less than 20 minutes, so this is the last snake you'll want to encounter in a rural setting where getting to the doctor is a bit of a problem. Unfortunately for Danny PNR, that's the exact situation he found himself in. In 1998, he was studying the habits of white rhinos in Pabeni tributary in South Africa when he ventured out on his own without telling anyone. As he waded through the stream, he remembers seeing a large brown snake slither in the nearby reeds, followed by a sharp pain behind his knee. The dreaded black mamba had struck, which meant he had a few hours to live, with an improvised bandage being his best bet at surviving. The venom had already taken effect as he hurried back to his car. At the wheel, he drove at 100 miles an hour until he ran into a car whose owner rushed him to the hospital 2 hours after the ordeal. By that time, he couldn't speak or swallow, and paralysis was slowly creeping in. One more minute without the doctor, and he would have died. Number 2. 19 Days in the Amazon. The Amazon is the perfect hangout joint for the avid adventurer. It's vast and serves up the most diverse plant and animal species collection on the planet. But all that can turn into a nightmare if you end up in a part of the jungle no one knows how to reach. Israeli author and entrepreneur Yossi Ginsberg was in such a situation in 1981 when he and a group of friends found themselves at the heart of the Bolivian Amazon. The group of 4 initially toured the jungle together with no problems, but disagreements arose the deeper they went until they eventually broke up into 2. Ginsberg will later break up with his partner a short while later, marking the start of the worst moment in his life. He spent the next 3 weeks braving the perilous jungle with its wild animals, a flood that almost drowned him, and a rotting foot. Just before he gave up, his partner turned up with a couple of locals after searching around for days. Ginsberg would later spend 3 months in the hospital to completely recover from the effects of the ordeal. Number 1. 71 Days in the Outback. Just like the Amazon, the Australian outback is vast with very few people, so getting stranded here isn't a very good situation to be in. In 2006, Ricky Midgie found himself with nothing in this unforgiving part of the world, and he impressively braved the conditions for 3 months straight. He lived in a makeshift shelter he fashioned out of branches and leaves, and adopted a rather peculiar diet made of snakes, leeches, and frogs. Water was also a problem, so he usually quenched his thirst using his own urine. He had said that all he remembers was giving a group of hitchhikers a lift as he was driving to his new job. The next thing was him in a shallow grave with